Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending where you are. And welcome to Connect Africa channel. We are here at the end of the week today, on Friday, with Dr. Binyam with us to talk about what's happening in the greater Horn of Africa, Sudan. So we will get to the bottom of it, what's happening in Sudan, what caused the war now, what are the implications to the region, who are the international actors behind this war, and as well, what's at stake mainly for the region. We will give an analysis. Dr. Binam will give us analysis from the African perspective. Welcome, Dr. Binam.
Thank you, Marlet, and thanks for the viewers. Yeah. Thanks for having me here.
No, it's always a pleasure to have you here. Yeah, so let's we are late like by 9 minutes, I think. So it has been almost a week since the war broke out in Sudan, which almost looks like a civil war between the Sudanese army force, and then the other one is a paramilitary rapid support force, I think. Uh, what is the cause for this war? What is behind it? Just give us a picture, a background picture. What caused the war?
Okay. Yeah, it is. It is. I think important to look into how things unfolded throughout this transition period that Sudan had been going through over the last few years since al-Bashir's government was ousted. Yeah. In that particular period in the 2000, and al-Bashir's government was pushed by months and months of protests by a number of forces, yeah, some democratic, some Islamist, and another range of coalitions basically wanting to get rid of the al-Bashir's regime. And in that process, and I think the military leadership, which sustained al-Bashir's regime for a very long time and propped up by that regime, took over power, yes, through a coup of some sort, and deposed al-Bashir, and they took over state power. And then they promised that they would hand over power to a civilian government. Yeah, and of course they were going to midwife a democracy, as it were claimed at the time. What has happened since then was a number of actors, regional mini powers, and international powers started to rush into Khartoum and trying to influence process to serve their perceived interests. And here you would find the Egyptians, whose intelligence and military are deeply entrenched in and networked within the Sudanese state and army as well. Then the Israeli intelligence wanting to somehow, find a way to network, and the Abraham Accord was a very important narrative and important project that they were looking at mending relations with a number of states, and not just that those two closer states, but you have now the West in general, in the US in particular, trying to influence process and Sudan. You must understand the number of envoys that was sent to Sudan. And of course, soon through that kind of arrangement, Abdullah Hamdok came to power through lengthy negotiation, and part of it was, facilitated by regional states, and then, of course, Dr. Abiy was there in the initial stages. Now, Abdullah Hamdok came to assume presidency, and of course a transitional one once again to facilitate a democratic election to to take place eventually. And what has happened then was Abdullah Hamdok's move into the palace was also linked with the US's and the West in general, wanting to influence Sudan's politics. And what they tried to do was promise Sudan, to be taken off the terrorist list that America had, would get a date a cancellation through the Paris Club and all the rest was promised to Sudan in return for what? And then obviously that we all have to ask why are they in a rush to somehow influence politics and process in Sudan? Obviously, they had their own ambition, controlling Sudan meant controlling the Red Sea. And right about the time, and I think it was in 2017, al Bashir's government had already initiated an engagement with the Russians to give them some kind of logistics hub, as it's now being called, a euphemism for a military base of sort, yeah, a naval military base of some sort by the Red Sea coast. And that negotiation was something that somehow scared the West as well. And you also have to understand the Nile politics, the Egypt and the Israelis and the Americans, and that they were supporting TPLF through their different networks, and of course Sudan was very important a part of that equation as well. They see the Horn of Africa as moving away from them, so the fallback position would be having Sudan and then using Sudan as sort of trying to corner this region, yeah, and find some to find the means and ways to somehow continue to influence the region to their perceived interests. So, number of players. Again, the Saudis and the Emiratis are also part of the equation as well, backing one or the other group within that. And in this, then the Americans started to see that this is going nowhere to their perceived objective. So what they try to do is, and not only the US, but also other mini powers, they started to see that if you have now a democratic process in Sudan, you're not going to get your favorite person in a position of power. So what you need to do is you have to become kingmaker, yeah. And for that to happen, then you have to have one or the other powerful players. And here, then it emerged the civilian part of it was sort of marginalized, and they started to prop up those generals. Yeah, on one hand, the leading the Sudanese army, SAF, Sudanese armed forces, and then on the other. Hamditi, who's running the Sudanese forces. Yeah. So what they have managed to do is now cause a collision between those two, instead of allowing them to work their differences internally. Yeah. Too many cooks in this kitchen, always you're going to have too many troubles. So you remember we spoke about the possibility of proxy war emerging in Africa, each rival group trying to support one or the other in an attempt to influence the state, control the state, yeah, capture the state, and that way then you would project your power in the region, yeah. Now the Russians have already they have made their presence felt in Central African Republic. Not only there, but then in that region, in the western and the Sahelian region. Yeah, and if you have Sudan connected to that, then now you have access to the Red Sea that connects it all the way to the Central African Republic and possibly also to all the way to West Africa. Very important. You have to understand. Now, it is extracting of resources and outlay to the resources that they are planning to extract from those areas. Remember, the Wagner Group is there to protect areas, and of course, trying to stabilize those states. But you need extractive activities also require that, in as much as instability is also a very important way of getting your feet into it. Yeah. And eventually, you need to have a stable state. That's what they're trying to do. So, connecting Central African Republic all the way to the Red Sea meant a very important, projection of power and access to resources. Influence. That influence is very important. And Americans are jittery about it, and they're trying to find a way to break that. And of course, it's not just that, it is losing the Horn of Africa altogether. They need an alternative. Yeah, they have no access to the Red Sea via Eritrea. And if Sudan falls away as well, then a large chunk of it is not going to be accessible to them, at least on the African side. We all know now on the West Asian side is also problematic for the Americans, increasingly becoming problematic. Yeah, so it is within this kind of framework that those two generals and forces found themselves in a loggerhead. Yeah, and this unfortunately happened for Sudanese people in the most holy months of Ramadan. You would not expect military leaders or politicians stirring chaos at this particular season, and that tells you something is unwholesome here. Yeah, and the brutality, the way it is being waged now, it is in the urban areas. Yeah, fighting is taking place in the middle of suburbs and residential areas. The casualties are not only just soldiers but also civilians, and this is troublesome. Yeah, and it's a very hot season. Yeah, and now they have already cut water. Electricity is also out, apparently, from what I've heard, and this is not a way to handle this kind of situation. I remember that President Isaias Afwerki was warning Hamditi when he left Eritrea, you guys must sort your issues internally. Don't let others interfere and meddle into your internal affairs. I mean, of course, the Prime Minister Abiy also mentioned the same thing. You guys have the wisdom. Don't let others come in and interfere the way they have already, and it's really problematic. And on two poles as well, Egypt and UAE are supporting one or the other. We already established that, and Libya is involved in it as well for some strange reason. Yeah, so this is now becoming a site for that kind of intervention, unwanted external intervention, which is going to exacerbate the problem. The ramifications are severe for all the region we're talking about. So this has to be located within that context. It's not just about Sudanese not liking each other, but external forces that are pulling the strings in those areas. And of course, I'm not saying that those two generals are holy people. They are literally crony capitalists that have been looting Sudan for far too long. Yeah, Hamditi apparently had billions. Could be a state on its own. Yeah. The same thing the generals and Abdullah Hamdok, and that fight for resource and control is also part of it, which is a very dangerous politics. But with all that, and I'm sure we know that Sudanese people have the wisdom and the patience to be able to work out their differences. I think this is enough background, and if you have any question, then I'll contribute to that.
Thank you. No, thank you very much, Dr. Binem, for that. You really give us a picture. I mean, this is almost a global war in the Northeast African country. There's Middle East, there's African countries as well. And then there is the big powers, also globally, the US, Russia.
Mm,
Uh, Now let's go to there is a peace talk that is started through IGAD
mm,
first, and then we have seen this strange move that they have excluded from the talk from this IGAD meeting, specifically Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and then President Isaias Afwerki, and
mm,
Eritrea just joined, or kind of, you know, it was on that move. We all
mm,
learned it during his visit to Kenya. Now, why so? There were three countries that are specifically involved. This is Kenya, South Sudan, and I think DRC. Why the exclusion of the two countries? If anything, I think they are the one who are going to be affected uh,
mm, mm.
by any any consequence from this war.
Yeah,
That's one. Secondly, President Ruto now has called, this is now beyond IGAD, and calling for the international so-called, when we always say international, who is
mm,
international anyway, to intervene in this. And of course he said together with IGAD and the African Union. What's your
mm,
view on this?
mm. Well, Malit, we can only speculate why the true leaders were not present. But my sense is IGAD has not been rehabilitated in the way we would like it to be. Yeah, and it must have been a phone call from Washington, yeah, telling them, you got to come together and do something about it, yeah. If they took their initiative, once again, it's just a speculation on my part, yeah, and it's not a good thing to do that. But reading what IGAD had been, I wouldn't be surprised if that's what has happened. Uh, However, it is very important the so-called excluded leaders were also the ones who are calling Sudanese people must be allowed to address their problem internally without external undue pressure. Yeah, uh, they need to together to address their problem. Yeah, and I have no doubt behind closed doors they are somehow trying to influence leaders on the ground, trying to bring this conflict to an end. Yeah, because the ramification of this is going to be internalizing this conflict, and with more and more external actors involved in it. So you would have a Syria, Libya type of situation where planes from elsewhere started to fly through and bombing, places. America's already threatening and the possibility of sending more troops to this area, and evacuation is being discussed, and all that. Yeah, and what do they call it? The task force being saved for. Uh, all this tells you that there are powerful players who want to intervene, and could see this as a perfect opportunity. That's a very dangerous thing. Yeah, they're calling it every crisis provides them an opportunity. That's how they see it. So misery of Sudanese people, they will try to extract something out of that, and that's the most dangerous part. So the two leaders that we see are not part of this discussion, IGAD's discussion in trying to resolve Sudanese situation. Uh, they were right out. They were calling that, yeah, internal issues must be dealt internally. Yeah, but for me, I know that there are some goodwills in IGAD, some members, but IGAD still needs to be reformed. Yeah, and for it to reflect aspiration of the region. Yeah, It needs to cease to being used by external forces that have been funding it or have always depended on whose resource that IGAD had always depended. Yeah, that we should not forget. It's still there. That kind of influence is still there. Remember, the US was counting that IGAD would exclude Eritrea, will continue to exclude Eritrea. That's what they hoped. But Eritrea started to take part. We've seen a couple of meetings where Eritreans delegates took part in IGAD's meeting. So it's already there. I don't know. Maybe we're waiting for a ceremonial entry, or but for all we know, that Eritrea is back into IGAD and trying to play its part for and with all issues that matter to this region. And of course, Sudanese problem impacts Eritrea and Ethiopia the most. But I wouldn't say they were excluded in a manner that would tell you that would this optics that we saw would represent. You remember these three leaders that were assigned, they have not been able to travel. And in fact, the one that is pushing the hardest is Salva Kiir. He's been in touch with the generals apparently, and Ruto only spoke to them. I think today probably had about 8 minutes contact with them, if I'm not mistaken, from what I've read. But sometimes we always have to take those reports with a pinch of salt. Uh, but that's where we are, and I think everybody wants peace for people of Sudan, and I have no doubt this will come to a speedy conclusion. Otherwise, the region cannot afford any protracted conflicts. It has enough of that.
Thank you, Dr. Biniam. Some say that this war is also, I have read a couple of days ago that this war is actually a proxy war between Ethiopia and Egypt. That's what's happening, one supporting the other, each of them supporting each general. But also, what I noticed is the double standard of the mainstream or the so-called international
Mm,
community. Remember when the war broke out in the northern region of Ethiopia? Ethiopia had, I mean, the Ethiopian National Defense Force had enough ground why it received a support from the Eritrean army because of how its national defense force was stabbed behind from this by these regional forces of TPLF. Now, we have seen Egyptian army, which the camera caught clearly, and
mm,
captivated by the or captured
mm,
by the Sudanese army forces. But then nothing has came out that condemns. They are not there to support at least the civilian government, but nothing
mm,
has come out. What do you think? I mean, you can just share your view on that, number one.
mm,
Number two, what do you are we expecting anything from the African Union, learning from what happened in Ethiopia? If so, what
mm.
should be the role of it?
Okay, okay. All right. Let's just place in perspective how Sudan is connected to the region. Okay. Now, to the west, yeah, you have the Darfur region where Hamditi comes from. Okay, that's his home base. In fact, Hamditi is an outsider to Khartoum, apparently. Yeah, his base is Darfur, and in fact, he has relationship with Chad and the different pastoralists that live in that region as well, in the Central African Republic as well. So his connection is rather to the west of Sudan. Yeah,
Mhm,
his base is rather. So when recently the SF spokesperson or any their official Twitter account claimed that uh, 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 countries in the west of Sudan are somehow supporting the rapid forces, Sudan's rapid forces. That clearly it will just immediately, give you the indication that it's either the two countries, yeah, either Chad or Central African Republic. And why do they do that? Because the ethnic affiliation and broader network that Hamditi had been able to establish. And Libya as well, he had been participating in Libya via UAE. Remember, he has worked with the UAE and he had been involved in the conflict in Libya. And he had been involved in conflict in Yemen, paid and supported by Saudis and UAE. So that linkage is there, yeah? This is how the one part is connected. The other part is the Abdullah Hamdok's, General, what's the second general's name? I forgot. The SAF general, forgot his name now. Slipped. Okay,
Amiti Dagalo?
no,
Amiti?
the Galo is Hamditi, the other one. Al Burhan, sorry. Al
Ah.
Burhan. Al Burhan is uh, deeply connected with the Egyptian army. Strong linkages. And of course, the intelligence, Sudanese intelligence, has a stronger connection with the Egyptian intelligence as well. So the joint military training that they were doing, saber rattling to intimidate Ethiopia, and in their bid to somehow escalate the conflict between them and Ethiopia in relation to GERD. Yeah, so somehow that connection remained to be strong. So when you see the military plane supporting the SAF, it's very difficult to tell whether some of them are Egyptians or Sudanese themselves. Yeah, and some had already claimed that Sudan, SAF is being supported by Egyptian military. That
Mhm.
element is very clear. Ethiopia, on the other hand, is very much cautious in its approach. And in fact, we cannot say that it had any deep connection to any of those players. It
Mhm.
probably preferred one of them, perhaps, but I hardly see a strong connection that would allow us to say that Ethiopia has a strong commitment to influence outcome in this particular conflict. And as you noticed in the recent reports that some of the military that were in Al Fashka, which was a contested area, and Ethiopians have been raising it as invaded land, right? They left. Now, you would normally assume that Ethiopia military would just quickly ran and take over but it hasn't done so. It doesn't want to get embroiled in that kind of conflict. I don't know if it is a genuine one. I would like to believe it is a genuine one, that there is a, a tendency to say, okay, let them sort out this issue on their own. Yeah. Even if they probably have a preferred outcome. MDT might also expect Ethiopia to support, yeah. But I would imagine Ethiopia will be a bit reticent, because if it start to support one party, the Egyptian want to support another party, and it will just escalate the tension in the region. Yeah, it would cause so much chaos. As soon as that conflict is dragged out, and then it would open up a possibility for the Americans and all the others to come in and create a mess of it. Remember the last time we saw Libya was dismantled, became it created a devastating outcome for the rest of the region, and obviously Sudan is that kind of capacity. You have to know. So I think Ethiopia is playing it a little bit cautiously. Same with Eritrea. It has a border, it has implication to its security, but it wants Sudanese to come together and address this particular issue that they have, and want a speedy conclusion to this conflict in the making. Well, already established.
Somebody here actually commented saying that the Sudanese should be left alone and they have to deal
Yeah,
with this by themselves.
yeah,
But now
yeah,
that the war broke out, can we say so? And with that, in relation to that, if you can really go in deep
okay,
and tell
yeah,
us what are the implications
yeah,
for the region,
yeah,
either in both cases, if the international community, the so-called international
mm,
community, come and
mm,
intervene,
mm,
or if they are just left alone and the war continue.
mm,
In either
mm.
way, what are the implications for the region?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think, sorry, I did leave out the question you raised about African Union, IGAD. What role should they play? We would like them to play a very important role, obviously. But then the thing is that they keep on being used as tools by the West. And we saw what has happened with the Pretoria Agreement. Yeah, Kenya was part of that, an African led initiative. Yeah, but if eventually it turned out to be an American project, yeah, to salvage and rehabilitate TPLF and somehow find a way for TPLF continue to have a political clout, and if not in the entire Ethiopia and the region, at least in the Tigray for the moment until it just regroups and be used again as a tool. It has always served them for a very long time. So there is reticence in insisting that regional bodies must step in. They need to demonstrate that they are independent enough to defend interests of regional states and the state and concerned. Now, uh, having said that, the ex- the experiments are very important. Yeah, we can only learn through engagements. Yeah, and of course, having genuine initiative to mediate should not be left out here. Yeah, whether it's individual, but too many cooks once again is always part of the problem. Now, I would imagine the Arab League would like to get involved. I would imagine the Americans want to lead this initiative. I would imagine the UAE want to take part in it, and that the Egyptians want to cook something there. The more hands you have in this kind of situation, you're not going to address the problem. We have seen it over the last 2 years, 2 years and a bit. What what have we seen in Sudan? All those initiatives, all the different envoys that was sent, so-called mediators, never worked. Why didn't it work? Because every mediator comes with a baggage, one, and two, own interest. Yeah, impose that interest on Sudanese people. Yeah, and it's not seeing the Sudanese interest as Sudanese interest, but it is an interest viewed through the prism of their own interests. And that means the overriding interest is those external actors that pose themselves as mediators and facilitators. Let me just take you back when they made a promise to cancel Sudanese state. Was it a genuine initiative to help Sudanese people, or was it to turn Sudan into another vassal state, an outpost for in their Horn of Africa project? Yeah, what was the intention? And it was done in a rush. You must understand the kind of hurry that we saw. It has never happened. And look at what they're trying to do to Ethiopia, dragging it out. And Ethiopia didn't ask for date cancellation. Date restructuring is what Ethiopia has asked for. So let's just sort of pretend that we have, you know, big powers that have local interests at heart. Yeah. So
But
that,
Dr. B, I'm sorry for the interruption, but somebody
yeah,
just texted me asking because you have also an economic background in development. If you
yeah.
can tell us, if you can elaborate, what is the difference between debt cancellation? Because people would think automatically, isn't it
Uh,
a good thing? And debt
yeah.
restructuring.
Yeah, the date restructuring meant that you will still pay the date, but then you want the payment to be reduced, to be done over a longer period of time. You know, so or suspended for a few years until you are able to, you know, to recover, be able to pay. That's what date restructuring is. Date cancellation is just they wipe out the date. Ethiopia received date cancellation when Prime Minister Meles Zenawi was in power.
But
So
then
clean.
what's the consequence of it?
No, you get
Is there,
clean.
is
Yeah,
there a
oh, no
package?
date. Yeah, it will be zero. It will be zero. But then in return, what are you giving? You know, for
Yeah.
your foreign policy, they would ask you ABCD. You have to be able to, you know, give them a favor. You know, I give you this and you give me that. What are you giving? So when Meles Zenawi gave that, then he became an errand boy for the US and Western imperialism in the region. So they tell him to go to South Sudan, meddle in this South Sudan process, go to Somalia. He had been doing that, yeah? And Sudanese, and their rush to get state cancellation, you know, they started to offend their regional partners, Ethiopia and Eritrea. It was offensive, you know, to have the most despised military unit based in Sudan and arming it and allowing all sorts of powers to support it, and arm was smuggled through that, yeah, to TPLF. Sudan facilitated that. Why? Because it was asked to do so in order to receive this, because they were so desperate. Sudan was in really terrible state. The inflation was so high, people were coming out in the street. You know, we call it the ish politics. The bread politics is so strong in Sudan. As soon as the bread price goes up, people come out in the streets. Yeah, depose the government. That's how Sudan, you know, bread has power in Sudan. Yeah. So that kind of inflation actually got rid of al Bashir and shook Abdullah Hamdok as well. He wasn't able to do anything. Too many of them coming in, too many of them meeting him, suggesting do this and do that, trying to influence his decisions. And in fact, at the end, what we have learned is that they're trying to hijack Sudanese foreign policy and local policy as well. And look at what they're trying to do to Ethiopia, data restructuring. Data restructuring, they promised that they will do that through Paris Club. But then they have long list of conditions in that, including, you know, what they call transnational justice and accountability and peace negotiations. What does that have to do with the economy? You know, if you want to help, you know, and the rest you do it as you go along. But then they're insisting on ABCD. But that is only to not cancel the date. You cancel the date, it will be zero. But date restructuring, that means Ethiopia is unable to pay its date, yeah, with its interest on a monthly basis, and therefore requesting, you know, to be suspended or the date payment to be reduced somehow with a longer term payment. Now the Paris Club is, through the IMF, are telling Ethiopia much of your data is from China, so you need to declare it and needs to be audited and all that. Silly request, and the Chinese are not going to bow to that. Why should they? The Chinese also have interest, and we must also recognize that they know they as angels they have interest. That's why they give you money. Yeah, they give you loans. They participate in your economy, even if it is great one. It's because at the back of that they have their national interest attached to it. So, and Ethiopia is stuck between this rock and a hard place, and they know that the Ethiopian economy is in tatters, so they want to exploit it. Yeah, they want to exploit it to maximum. They have dragged this for months. Yeah, keep on playing it and playing it and playing it, and we could see the inflation is going up. Ethiopia is still, the going to its knees slowly but surely. And then they demanding something that Ethiopian government cannot afford. Yeah, they're asking Ethiopian government to cut subsidies, to cut government spending. That means that no more developmental state. That's what they're telling. Every state has to be a developmental state. All great states became what they are today through becoming a developmentalist one. Invest in infrastructure, in education, in healthcare, invest in ambitious projects that would transform the state. That's what the states have always done. Strategic investment. Yeah. South Korea made it through that. China made it through that. Russia's successes due to that. France's successes due to that. France is to this day a developmentalist. Israel made it through becoming a developmental state, but they're now telling Ethiopian government, no, you have to get rid of all that. Yeah, liberalize your financial market. That means money must come in and out as it wish. Money has never been nationalist. It has never been nationalist. You have to regulate it so that it would serve the interest of the masses. Yeah. Otherwise, it would just want to do whatever it wants. Yeah. So all the money being made in Ethiopia would go directly to UAE. Yeah. And it would be spent in buying luxurious goods, and while the masses are still struggling to survive. And that's the kind of condition that this would create. And eventually, that would be a political time bomb. It will depose the government. Yeah, when people are subjected to that, and eventually they will rise up and will turn the government. Will turn in their government. It has happened every way this has been tried. Sudanese government went through that, and then we have seen what has happened. Yeah. So it's a very dangerous terrain. I don't know if Ethiopian negotiators would accept this, but if they go and accept those conditions, and Ethiopia is in for a very troubled years and seasons to come. Yeah. It's just going to be very hard. Already very troubling situation economically, politically, and socially, and it's going to exacerbate that. Already, the state is unable to pay. In some states, we have heard that they have not been able to pay salaries. Yeah, so it's a huge struggle, and they know the Americans in the West do actually know this is a serious problem. So they want to extract as much as they can out of this. Yeah. But what can Ethiopia give in return? Whatever they would ask, will they be able to give Ethiopia? I mean, will Ethiopia be able to give? Get rid of the Chinese, don't work with the Eritreans, yeah, and turn against your neighbors. How's it going to work? It's impossible. It's an impossibility. It will be a fate what Sudan has. Sudan turned against its neighbors, and then look at what Sudan is now, where Sudan is now. Yeah, it's not going to gain anything out of it. So, I mean, I think that's the economic and the political economy of it.
Yeah, just a small reflection on that. I think the Ethiopian government, in a way, not directly, but addressed yesterday or the day before yesterday that it was not successful, with the negotiators that went to the US, which is a good thing. But now people
Yeah,
think, different. I think it's a topic for another day by itself.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, that's where it is. And they said we will try to deal with local economy, something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
That's where it is. Okay.
Mm.
I think we can move it. It's me who interrupted you.
Yeah,
Now you
yeah,
can go ahead to
yeah,
the implication on the region. I really would love to hear
yeah,
from you as a
yeah,
region and as well country by country, and especially Ethiopia and Eritrea
yeah,
and others
yeah,
who's going to be affected by it.
yeah. Now, you see, if this conflict started to drag on, yeah, um, I get the sense Central African Republic and Chad are going to be, increasingly embroiled into this, yeah. And already we're seeing that Egyptians are scrambling, yeah, and trying to emerge as victors out of this conflict. What that means is that they have somebody in control of the Sudanese state that would serve their interests, particularly in their geostrategic perceived interest in relation to their negotiation with the Nile River, control over the Nile, projecting influence into the rest of that Nile Basin region. And Sudan is a very important component to that. So and the Americans are going to be the biggest destructive force in this. They want to bring in their foot into this problem, yeah, uh, and that's going to, contribute to a devastation of Sudan, but also serious implications to the regional peace and security. Yeah, and Sudan is going to go once again back into ethnic conflicts of some sort. And that is very dangerous and toxic, as you have already noticed in many parts of our region. And it's going to lead to another devastating civil war for Sudan. And obviously with Eritrea and Ethiopia on this side, and South Sudan, Central African Republic, and Chad on the other end, and Egypt, all those countries are going to somehow finding themselves. Of course, there are too many weapons as well that we have to understand. And remember, much of the illegal weapons were coming to Ethiopia via Sudan. Illegal weapons come to South Sudan via Sudan, and Central African Republic the same story, and Chad. So we're going to have an explosion. It has to be contained. It has to be contained very fast. And my biggest worry is now the Americans are seeing it a, a way to have a step into the region, into the Red Sea, and of course also block Russians. The Russians are already in Central African Republic, and the Wagner Group is apparently working with Hamditi, with the SRF, and they seen that as a huge threat. So and they want to counter that, and that will turn into a proxy war, and a similar proportion to what we're seeing in Ukraine. Each one channeling in money and weapon, throwing into it, and eventually creating a toxic mix for this to continue. And that's the dangerous part for all regional states. And of course we had been hoping for all the regional states coming together. I think the wind from the 2018 with the Eritrea and Ethiopia mending faces, Poshma, Somalia coming to board, Sudan turned into this transition, and there was huge hope that Sudan is going to join this. South Sudan coming on fold, Djibouti. There was big dream. Yeah, we're clinging to that dream. We're not going to lose faith, but this is one of the setbacks, and obviously it's a serious one for that. Similar to proportion that TPLF has unleashed upon us. And Sudanese people do not deserve this. Yeah, they're very caring people, loving people. Throughout their history, they have been, I would call them a country of gods, yeah, country of chemists. Yeah, everybody recognized them as very loving and caring people. But this has to fit into this peacemaking as well. And I think I'm very hopeful that somehow this would come to a speedy conclusion. The assumption was it would be quick, that Hamdok would be, Hamditi would be deposed because he has a ragtag army, and Al Burhan has sophisticated army, and now Al Burhan is being taken out, and a number of his assets being taken by Hamditi. Hamditi is now becoming increasingly more powerful and accessing weapons that traditional paratroops are not exposed to. We're seeing tanks and we're seeing anti-aircraft missiles and whatever. So I don't know where that is going. Yeah, but somehow it would have to come to a speedy conclusion. Uh, and those who are learned individuals, so-called learned individuals, are calling for sanction. The U.S. must use this leverage to do ABCD. Who's the U.S. really? Does the U.S. have local interests at heart? What is those sanctions to do? I mean, Sudan was under U.S. sanction for years. Had it helped? I never have, but then they we continue to pretend. So I saw a couple of guys, people interviewed in Al Jazeera, and others in the France 24, talking about all kinds of nonsense. And of course, the
Calling
so-called
for
experts are always promoting US intervention, Western intervention in our areas. They're not telling us we could solve our problem by doing it our way. They would always bring in their governments into it, yeah? So the US must do this, EU must do that, and then in turn, what are they going to do? Maneuver this process to serve their interests, not the local interests. They want to emerge as kingmakers. Ultimately, that's what they aspire to achieve, even through whatever mediation, negotiation that they claim to have facilitated and paid. Uh, yeah, contribute financial contribution is always there to extract something as well. So there's no free lunch, as they say.
Definitely. Wow. Thank you, Dr. Biniam. Really. One interesting thing is that, and I saw it also being asked by others, how a paramilitary group or army came to be so powerful. And I think Ethiopia is taking a lesson as this is happening, because we also have
Mhm.
that issues right
Yeah,
now. Yeah,
yeah,
it's something that need to be
yeah,
dealt with. Would you like to share a reflection on that?
yeah.
Or
Oh yes, oh yes. Now I'm sure that as soon as the Sudanese conflict started to capture everybody's attention, and then I just started to notice that all Ethiopians who were complaining about the Amhara
yeah,
regional forces being disarmed, they kept quiet. All of a sudden, they started to keep quiet. But anyway, I think you have to understand the similarities are there. Yeah, similarities are there. The Hamditi comes from Darfur, as I indicated to you, and Darfur had ethnic conflict. Yeah, uh, very protracted ethnic conflict, and that's to do with the climate change, droughts. Yeah, and the pastoralists fighting for resource.
Very volatile region. Yeah.
Yeah, it had been going on for a very long time. So when the West started to intervene in Sudan, they wanted to split Sudan into different countries, and Darfur was one part of that. So
Mm.
they cooked what they called this genocide. Genocide. Remember that the George Clooney and all those, media publicities were talking about genocide in Darfur, Arabs killing Africans. There was a very important, racist, but a very important narrative that they established. So the Sudanese government, under pressure, felt that okay, let me just do it this way. Those are local militias, right? The ethnic group fighting another
Mhm.
ethnic group. So let me just arm them so that they would continue to wage the war on our behalf. So that's how Hamditi was recruited into this paramilitary grouping. And he's shot through the ranks. So he was a camel trader, has interest in that. But obviously, this financial incentive that was coming along with it was also very important. And as much as it was also important for resource conflict, remember it's about water, yeah, and grazing land. The tension was around that. The different ethnic groups were fighting over this kind of resources scarcity that became a prominent feature of that area due to climatic changes that we are seeing all over the world. But the West wanted to extract them, particularly the Israelis and the Egyptians who sought also to shape restructure Sudan and to their liking. Yeah,
Mhm.
so it is within this context that the special rapid forces started to emerge, and later on, once Darfur became over, remember now nobody talks about
That,
genocide in Darfur.
yeah.
Remember, and it's a good book written by Mahmoud Mamdani. Yeah, on Darfur. It's called Survivors, I think, by Mahmoud Mamdani, Survivors. And he talks about all these numbers that they gave us, they all cooked. Who cooked them? The UN agencies. And then when they were quizzed a bit further, they say, oh, many of them died through diarrhea. Remember the number of days that they were cooking in Tigray and
Mhm.
to create this Darfur
Genocide.
genocide? That's how they were doing it in Darfur as well. UN agencies were cooking the numbers. And then of course, what is genocide? Genocide is an excess death. How is excess days determined? This number of days has to be, if it is in a war situation, if it exceeds this one, then it is considered to be genocide. And then they brought in all other days, children dying from diarrhea, malnutrition, which is already a condition caused by drought and all the others. Now, it is this context that the Sudanese government had to try to retract itself from being genocidal and then allowing local militias as they used to be called, but
Mhm.
then equipping them with better they making them better armed, yeah, and in that process created the special forces. Now I'll give you the parallel here. Special forces in Ethiopia started where? In Somalia, in Somali region of Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Why? Because Ethiopian army, yeah, I would rather say TPLF's army, because General Kawartar was one responsible for that. And he was a big time trader. He wanted to control every trade, every smuggling ring. And then, of course, he had to get rid of all the Somalis, yeah, who were resisting that. So, in the name of getting rid of those rebels, yeah, you pushing them. Like if there is any genocide that was committed in Ethiopia, it was to get rid of the Somalis from that area in Ogaden. And Ethiopia, in a fear of being called genocidal state, then moved away and created this special forces, yeah, run by our famous,
US. It's funded
uh,
by US, the US as well.
funded by US and EU. And what's that famous guy who was running the special forces and later on became president of the Somali region. Abdi Ile,
Abdile, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, brutally, brutally destroyed his own people on behalf of the TPLF kingpins. Yeah, his interest became far more important than his the well-being of his
The
fellow
masses.
Somalis. Yeah, so this is how Hamditi was born, and he was able to move up the ranks and be able to establish a very massive army. Yeah? Initially, it was then again, of course, because he knew that area, the UAE recruited him to take part in Libya. Yeah, and the Libyan conflict, UAE was very much embroiled in Libyan conflict in an attempt to resuscitate the Libyan state and resuscitate it in a way that it would be a vassal for UAE interest in that region. That he took part in that. And later on, the Yemeni conflict started to emerge. So he started literally operate like a mercenary, yeah, taking part in a conflict in Yemen, and then it will be sent there, and it will be sent in Chad as well. Chad had been paying him, and in fact, from a couple of readings, I learned that his brother is a general in the Chadan army. Yeah, so Hamditi's brother is a general in an army in Chad. So you could see that this is how he started to become ever more powerful. And of course, he came to Khartoum as part of this coalition that deposed al Bashir in 2000. I'm sure it is in 2000, if I maybe 2019 or 2000, must have been 2000. So he took part in that coalition, and uh, he managed to come to Khartoum. But of course, everybody in Khartoum sees him as the outsider. And now, increasingly empowered by having control over mining areas, yeah, particularly gold. He's reputed to participate in a gold trade, gold being mined from Sudan and exported to UAE in a massive no amount, and lately as well with Russia. Russia is in this gold buying frenzy for about 7, 8 years. An attempt to cushion itself against increasing U.S. sanction. So, and of course the move toward this untangling itself from using dollar as part of its trade. So it had been accumulating gold, and Sudan has a massive gold reserve. Now link that to the uranium trade. Yeah, the uranium extract to be extracted in Chad and Central African Republic. It's directly next door to Darfur. You must understand. So a very important partner that the Wagner Group would probably consider him as a significant partner. Through that network as well, he might be able to pop up his paramilitary group. Yeah, now it's bloated. It's not. And the TPLF pursued similar strategy, but in a TPLF, even the militia is trained as much more harder and a lot more sophisticated than the Ethiopian army itself. That's how the TPLF used to train its militia. They knew they were preparing for this for a very long time. And their special forces are not just any special forces. The Amhara region might claim that it has special forces, but the TPLF literally has para commandos. I think that we have seen them. The way they were training them. They were doing it on a public display. But that's how slowly those paramilitary troops become ever more powerful and start to acquire weapons that they weren't originally supposed to have. Now, Hamditi has tanks, and a recent report he captured anti-aircraft missile. So growing into becoming a very very huge military contender, and that's a big lesson for everybody concerned. You have to have one army, yeah, one government, and a citizen that binds, the state. You have to have those things for the state to be coherent and be able to function properly and exert its aspirations, yeah, and define its destiny. If you don't have that, one people, one government, and one army, they need to be in sync. But Sudan, as you can see, different partners, bought by different interest group from outside, yeah, state and as non-state actors as well. You have to also realize that. And I leave it here.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dr. Binam. Really, um, hopefully Ethiopia is taking notes. It's because
Yeah.
there is a very very big similarity in what's happening. In fact, also uh, although there are external actors, but the very conflict, what really it ignited it is how the talk of how they become one army in terms of timing and other things. This is what led to the conflict. But of course, there are other factors to it, especially foreign actors.
Yeah,
Um,
let me give you just a few minor details. They might look not that important, but they are very important. Just prior to this conflict, yeah, Secretary Blinken had been in contact with both. Yeah, had been in phone call, and a number of European delegates were also meeting them. Yeah, on regular basis, and Hamditi was also in discussion with them. What were they talking? And the night this conflict started, the American ambassador arrived that day. What does that say? I mean, I do not always see coincidences as
mhm,
being a useful way of thinking about international politics. There, usually things are choreographed, planned.
exactly.
Yeah. So all this talks, meetings, yeah, jostling, maneuvering, all that. Yeah. And then they, as if they did nothing, they started blaming, oh, Eritrea. One of them came out and said Eritrea is supporting this, Ethiopia is trying to support that, but they were cooking something. What were they cooking? And in one article that I can't remember his name, but it must have been a Middle East guy or somewhere. He argued that Americans are not eager the transition to civilian rule because that would entail having a democratic election, and if election takes place, then they would know somebody that would not like America meddling in Sudanese politics would come to power. So they want to be kingmakers, so they prefer al-Burhan, their preference. So they're telling al-Burhan, you must force this fool into becoming part of your army. So as soon as the special rapid forces are dismantled, then Hamditi would have no power. Hamditi wanted, no, you can't tell me 2 years. I want to do it over 10 years.
Yeah.
Consolidated, but over 10 years. So, those were part of the negotiation. Those could have been solved, but then what kind of pressure was being applied? What were they telling them or intimidating them? Coercing them to take action one way or the other. That's very important to bring it into this conversation in order to understand what kind of meddling that is being taking place behind those, conflicts and then lead up to this eruption.
Yeah, very interesting. Just to clarify, the American ambassador, you said, arrived before the
in
start of
Khartoum.
this
Yeah, the
this
day.
very
Yeah,
war. That yeah,
yes,
yeah.
the day it's the night it started. He arrived that day. It's on Twitter. On his Twitter account, claimed I was woken up by gunshots. I just arrived here today. He said.
It's really interesting because uh, also when they opened the embassy after 20 years, and right after that was it al-Bashir thrown, something happened
Yeah.
right after
Now,
the
look,
embassy.
and then of course, let's just bring in another comparison here as well. Sorry, I'm also interrupting you. Uh, Remember when in November 2021, yeah, uh, when TPLF was marching to Addis, yeah, they
Mhm.
told all their staffers to leave. The scare tactics. They were intimidating everybody. This is not safe. It's going to fall under this, and then the whole story. It's not a safe place to go to. Yeah,
Yeah,
they even bribed the Zambian government to take its own evacuators. You
yeah,
know.
so
Now
sad.
this is what they did, right? So they took out embassy stuff and all that. Now, and I think 2 days after this conflict started, uh, American embassy car was hit with weapons. Yeah, it was shot at.
Mhm.
A round of bullets, apparently, not just one. A round of bullets. It's a bulletproof one, but then still it sends a message. It is not a safe place for you. That's what it means. And they said they're not going to leave.
Wow.
Said they're not going to evacuate embassy stuff. What does that mean? That means they want to cook something there. Yeah, they don't
Mhm.
want to leave. They want to handle the situation. Be part of this. It's a war. It's their war. So that's how I always see it. It
Yeah.
is their war. They're not seeing it a war Sudanese people are waging, so they save them from themselves. That's not what they're telling us. They want to steer this in a way that would serve them their interest. And their interest is, once again, yeah, it's about their resource. They have been very blunt about it. They are interested in Africa. Their interest in this region, it's all about resource, nothing else. They have resource competition with China and Russia. That's all it is about. Nothing about our safety, our well-being, our development, our ability to coexist peacefully with each other. Yeah, not even about democracy, as they say. It's just a meaningless point. By now, everybody should know when they say democracy important. Then everybody should know it's a bogus story. It's a sheer lie. Yeah. So it is. That's exactly how they are handling it. It's not just the Americans that are saying that. The Europeans are also saying that they're not going to evacuate their staffers. And the European Union, I think, ambassador was also shot at. The embassy was shot at. I mean, a range of embassies. Japanese embassy was shot at. There's looting taking place in different places, in different embassies. And those kinds of insecurity are not intimidating them to leave the city. But in Ethiopia, in a peaceful city of Addis at the time, they wanted to evacuate everybody. They were
Man.
telling even the government leaders to leave the country.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So
definitely,
using
definitely.
that, yeah, we've got a plane ready for you if you want to leave now. That's
Hopefully, Prime Minister Abiy will write that in a book and yeah, make us read
yeah.
what was going on behind the door. There's, of course, obviously a lot. Wow. Thank you very much, Dr. Binam. As usual, it's really a pleasure to have you here. We have learned, including myself and everyone here, have learned a lot, and we definitely also try to bring you kind of a panel discussion by having representatives from all the countries in the region, and then discuss
Yeah.
and then hear what they say. And people also from Sudan, by the way, including also Dr. Binyam, yourself, and others who are viewing this video. If you know someone from Sudan, so far we were not
Yeah.
able to,
So, yeah.
successful to get the one we have. We're not able
They
to.
need to tell their story as well.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. We need to hear. We need to hear their stories.
Mm,
That being said, really, our hearts and prayers are with our sisters and brothers in Sudan. As you said, Sudanese people are really wonderful, beautiful hearts. They have been, hosting a number of
mm,
refugees from different countries in the region,
mhm,
Ethiopians,
mhm,
Eritreans, different. Yeah, it's not really, this is not really what they deserve, and especially in
mhm,
this, the holiest months that they are facing this. And hopefully, yeah, we do believe, as people here, sharing the knowledge based on our research and our opinions. We do believe Africans are able, to solve
mhm,
their problems, and regardless of what, that's a principle we need to
mhm,
stick to. We have to be able. It's really, as an Ethiopian, I know that when Blinken came, was it in 2021, to Nairobi, to mobilize leaders, it
mhm,
was Nigeria, Senegal, and Kenya
mhm, mhm,
against Prime Minister Abiy, against Ethiopia. It was that time we heard, I think, the Foreign Secretary or something, Madame Rachel, I forgot
mhm,
her title, who said, we do believe in the wisdom of Ethiopian people and the leadership, and
mhm,
how really heartwarming that is. So it's important for the Sudanese people to hear that
mhm,
also, they have the wisdom to
mhm.
solve this. Yeah, with that, this session has come to an end. Have a good evening, and have a good weekend. And until next time, bye bye.
Thank you, Marlet.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, viewers, for being with us. Thank you, Marlet. You
Yeah,
have a
you have
great
received a lot of, yeah, there are comments, and one of them, I think you answered it. I showed it to you. But yeah, it was a good engagement. Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.
weekend.